You would think that when your state rep votes, you would be able to know how they voted. They represent you, after all. But most of the time, you'd be out of luck, because there's no record of how they voted. When Massachusetts passed criminal justice reform in 2017, state reps snuck in a Blue Lives Matter amendment that gave police more power and created a new mandatory minimum. The amendment was opposed by criminal justice advocates, but it passed, and we don't know which state reps voted for it. On the other hand, the Safe Communities Act, a bill that had tremendous popular support and would have protected immigrants from Trump's cruel and racist policies, was brought to the Massachusetts legislature, but was killed. Want to know how those state reps voted? Good luck. They never recorded their vote. So why are we in the dark on all these votes? The House usually doesn't record how state reps vote. The exception is if there's a roll call vote. To request a roll call, 16 reps have to demand it, and it's extremely rushed. They have 5 seconds to jump to their feet before the chair declares if enough of them demanded it. Without roll call, there's just a voice vote. The chair simply declares the outcome of the vote by how many ayes and nays they hear. There is no record on how wide the margin was or who voted which way. And in most cases, nobody says a word. The chair just decides what the outcome would have been based on what he or she is told by leadership.
Amendment number 18. Representative Jones of North Reading and other members of the House move to amend the order by inserting after proposed Rule 33F the following. 33J.
Chair hears no objection. The clerk will dispense with the further reading of the amendment. Chair hears none. Question comes on the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The noes have it. The amendment is not adopted.
Yeah, this is how laws are made. Even though they have a fancy little voting machine at...
And we are live. We're back with Renters Radio. This is the State of the State House special. I'm your host, Lauren Pespisa. I'm happy to be with you once again in this dire time, talking about the issues at the State House. I really appreciate that intro from Erica. Vote for Erica if you live in Somerville.
That was that first time running a political ad on air. That was good.
And we didn't even get paid for it.
I know. I wonder if we broke any FEC violations.
Well, I mean, there's no money involved. We just support this candidate
That's
because
true.
they're calling out the transparency issues in the White House, or not the White House, the State House. And
It's a
they
problem at all levels, don't worry.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It applies to everything, but the Bob DeLeo graphic is my favorite. That's all. So I'm here with my co-host, as usual, Evan George.
Hello, hello.
How have you been?
I've been fantastic. I've been busy, but probably not as busy as I guessed where it comes to electoral work, which is, as people probably could hear, we have Jonathan Cohen in the studio. How's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure.
So I just want to say the first time I met Jonathan was when I was walking home from work in Brighton on Parsons Street, and I believe you were canvassing for Lee Nave Jr.
Yeah.
And I'd been canvassing for Lee Nave Jr., and I was like, yo, I know you from Twitter once you told me your name. He's like the master of hot takes and the canvassing superhero for local progressive candidates.
I try.
And I guess you have a day job. And
I manage my time well.
yeah, exactly. Super effective and super funny. So we're really glad to have you on for some insight. So couple things have been going on at the State House recently that have been really bothering us, or at least bothering me and probably all of us, which have been the major police reform bill and the housing bills. And we're going to get into that, but I know Evan has some kind of like overarching arc he wants to get into.
I do. And just 'cause you got to share your Jonathan story. So
Yes.
one of my favorite stories about you, and this was during the primary, Democratic primary from like Warren and Bernie.
Yeah.
And like the Twitter battles of like the Boston, Massachusetts, Warren people versus Bernie people. And someone, a Bernie bro, but like in the bad sense, not the positive way that I'm a Bernie bro,
Yeah.
the bad sense. He posted a photo of you and just said like, check out this Liz lad. And everyone on like both the Warren side, the Bernie side, and like the ultra left side just started bashing this kid. It was like, don't you ever talk about Jonathan that way. And like it brought all of Twitter together for like a good hour. And
That's funny.
Yeah.
Unifying figure among the left. I try.
And yeah, so we had the budget episode about the city council, and then Michelle Wu wanted to come on, and this was another thing that really pissed us off in terms of the State House and how our State House operates. And that, you know, because every year we go through this, and every year people are like, how do we have supermajorities of the Democratic Party, and Massachusetts can't pass like the most marginal, even if you want to call it progressive. And like one of the big fights that happened during this was the Koseka movement, who's been trying to pass the this might not be the official title. You might know what it is.
Work and Family Mobility Act.
Thank you. Which is basically to allow just an expanded use of documents so people who are undocumented can gain access to a driver's license. This is not a controversial thing. It exists in, I believe, 12 to 15 other states.
Including even some red states.
Yes. And yet, after 15 years, these people had to sleep out in front of the State House for 13 days, sleeping outside during what was insane heat, just to get them to have a vote on the bill, which they refused to do. And so what we are going to try to answer, and we might fail because this is a meta topic, is just how is this possible? How do we live in a solid blue state? And to do this, because I am ill-equipped to do it, we brought you in. We brought the experts. And we were going to have Matt Miller and Grace come on. However, they have been bought off by the Walsh administration. So, I'm only kidding. They had some last-minute things. All love. We're going to have them on at some point. But somebody else reached out to us who is also angry about the State House. And Herb, if you want to try to bring on other surprise guest just to join the conversation. And we're going to take it, and the reason we side with the Act en masse is the internal workings of the State House are completely anti-democratic. And there's a few different elements of this that we can go into. But I just want to hear just from your thoughts on it. What is to you the most anti-democratic element of the Massachusetts State House?
Ooh, if I had to
Yeah. If you had to prioritize it.
If I had to only choose one, what would I think? What would I go with if I could? The one thing I'll point to is, I don't know if I would say this is quite the most anti-democratic thing, but it's a structural thing that creates a lot of the problems, is the nature of how they have a very tiered system for the money that they get, which they voted to make even more tiered before, so that you have a built-in incentive to do whatever the speaker wants, because the speaker can keep or can give you a chairmanship or a vice chairmanship or deny that to you, and that's a significant sum of money. So it helps create a system where people view the speaker as their boss rather than their constituents as their boss, because the speaker determines their salary in a way that their constituents don't.
Ooh, I like that one.
And who is the speaker, so we can all be clear?
Oh, about Bob DeLeo of Winthrop?
Bob DeLeo.
Winthrop.
But
I think we
been
may
an
have
ongoing struggle here.
we may have contact. Do we have our surprise guest?
Wait, am I going to be surprised? We have a guest?
Hello?
What's going on? What's up?
Hello.
And is this Scam the Milkman Tarley?
Yes, this is.
Oh my God. Hello. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Sorry, what's going on? I heard someone bailed out. I figured I could fill in a little bit, provide some commentary. It's not like I'm doing anything besides making McRunny, so whatever.
Nice.
Yeah, this is our first cross Boston Left podcast episode. So this is good.
Synergy.
Yeah, it's like the Infinity War episode of the Avengers here. So right now, what we're talking. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Is my sound okay?
We need. Can you turn it up, Herb? It's a little quiet.
There we go. Be playing with the ones and twos. You want to sing us a tune? We can touch your levels.
Should be good.
Hello?
Should be good. I'm here.
Okay.
I was gonna say maybe move a little bit closer to your thing. I mean, I can hear you, but it's a little
Yeah,
soft.
it's a little quiet, but
But that's okay.
It's
So
a little quiet? Okay. Let me DM you another number then and call me on that one.
gosh.
yeah,
dude's
we can
got-
do it.
It's got burners for days.
All right. So while we set that up, I think
Okay.
so what you listed was basically the ability to give and take away chairmanships.
Yeah. And so kind of that kind of almost income structure that it exists, where you really do have somebody acting as your boss and being able to kind of give or deny stuff. I would also say that there's a certain an element of the ability to give or deny information, and the kind of the very tight timeline that things operate in is another particularly undemocratic thing. That you saw that in the House recently, when you or kind of a few times where you'll see a bill formally exit the House Ways and Means Committee at like 11 a.m. and then amendments are due at the end of the business day and people start voting the next day. So that you really don't have, so other than, let's say, if you can hear about if you can get access to the text because you know somebody who knows somebody, other than that, it's like a mad scramble in which representatives need to actually like figure out what they're even going to file, even though they end up withdrawing all of their amendments anyway. But it ends up making it so that it's very difficult for advocates to engage
Your call
in a
has been
serious way in
forwarded
the
to an
process
automated voice
because of how
messaging system.
tightly information is controlled.
9, 7, 8, 7.
Oh, you are doxing somebody right now.
That was so close. I was all right. You know the area code.
8675309.
Yeah, you know
Has
nothing.
anybody ever tried calling that number?
There's actually there's an entire website. I know this fact. An entire website devoted to that number with every area code and what it is.
That's amazing.
And half of it is Jenny's plumbing service. Or something. Somebody got the number.
If I were a small business and had the ability to get that number and name something Jenny's, like kudos.
That's exactly what it is. Yes, it's awesome.
And all right, attempt number 2. Milkman, are you there?
Hi.
Oh, there
Sorry,
we go.
yeah.
Oh, you sound great.
Sorry, yeah, no, I figured I might as well just use like a direct line then. That might be a little bit easier. So
yeah, that's
sorry for the delay. Scamwell Tarley is here now. Whatever. What's going on? How's everybody doing?
We're doing well. A little
Good.
toasty in the heat, but we have some porch rockers. I'm not as fancy as you. I'm not a mixologist.
Oh yeah, these
Basic
are
beer
just
guy.
regular Boston beers. So just a quick intro. This is Scamwell Tarley from We Need Some Milk podcast. Want to cross promote there where cross promotion is due, and can carry on from there.
Yeah, it's very, figured I could come on and chat a little bit. Jonathan's the expert. I'm more the observer.
Nice to hear you.
Jonathan's been on our pod. That's funny.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I might as well just nothing's new, right? Same routine. What's up? What's going on? How's everybody feeling? Is everybody mad?
Yes, that's what I was
still
going to
mad.
say.
Still mad.
Yours is the only podcast that really encapsulates the same anger that I have. So I feel very validated when I listen to it.
Well,
Look, if you're angry, you aren't really paying attention.
Yeah, it's
it's
somebody
just
else feels it.
it's righteous anger. But continue
Yeah.
the discussion. I was watching it earlier on live. So
No.
continue.
So right now we're going to attempt to answer a very meta question, which is how is it that the Massachusetts Democratic Party, Democrats control supermajorities, but we can't pass progressive legislation at all. And right now we're just going over some quick highlights as to the internal workings of the state house. Jonathan mentioned the chairmanships and how basically you have a financial structure to do what the speaker says. Also, the quick timeline that people have once you receive the bill to file amendments. People have, 3 hours?
Yeah, it could be maybe something kind of like 6 hours sometimes. It's like you don't even have a full day to do stuff. Because at the start of the session, Representative John Hecht of Watertown had filed an amendment to the rules package saying that people should have at least 3 hours, so at least 3 days to read a bill before voting on it, and they overwhelmingly voted that down, as though that's somehow controversial that you should have enough time to actually do diligence in what you're about to vote on. And they even voted recently against having 2 hours to read bills before voting on them in committee.
Jeez. So it's a speed vote.
Exactly. Good luck.
Do what DeLeo tells you, basically.
And I mean, so you didn't go with for me is the most obvious, which is the thing that we mentioned this on this program before.
Yeah.
But it is we do not record how people vote. I don't know what the actual ratio is.
Yeah. That in the sense of when it comes to the interaction between, let's say, the building and the outside world, the fact that so many things die with everybody having clean hands, it is a major loss when it comes to actually civic accountability.
Right.
Because, and you can see that with some of the bills recently, especially with especially when it comes to the police reform bills, where many amendments are withdrawn without discussion or debate. So simply, person goes through the process of filing them, then they're gone. Or then, as the video from Erica really excellently demonstrated, even if something is formally voted up or no, so often nobody speaks on it. They don't even read the full amendment. There's no actual vote. There's no actual record of if it did pass or if it didn't pass, where anybody stood. So it makes it difficult for both representatives to really engage in the process, but for you to know what your legislators are doing, because but the number of actually contested votes are rare. And some of the times when they even do have recorded votes, it's a ceremonial thing where they all agree and they all think it's good and they want to be on record. And it's like,
The House unanimously, yeah.
Exactly. Like, give yourself a pat on the back. Like, some of this is like, I think sometimes I think it is legally required. I think that they are legally required to vote on a rules suspension, like when they go past 9 p.m. and they have to vote on it. Congratulations. Or if they're like transferring land from the state to a municipality and they formally need to vote on it, and they need to formally vote if they're overriding a veto from the governor, which they don't do that often. In past years, they've only really done that when it comes to line items for the budget. So like restoring a bunch of earmarks to their district is like the only time, like last session, that they actually put up a fight to the governor.
So this has been an ongoing issue in our state house for a while. However, the past couple weeks, we have seen a lot of roll calls.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
So the police reform one, especially in the House, was a fascinating thing to watch, because you had a number of people, especially because it was such a contentious issue, and it's a contentious issue from like both sides of the political spectrum, created an incentive where a number of people wanted themselves and their colleagues on record, and then it led to a number of votes that are much closer than one typically expects. Because in some cases, if Republicans think that police issues are a winner for them, they want to go on record of weakening the bill as much as possible. Same for some conservative Democrats. And then there are kind of some, on the progressive side, people who want to go on record of supporting strengthening things because they view that it's kind of politically advantageous. So it was a fascinating thing. It was a multi-day debate where people actually did talk about things for once, which is rare in the House. One of the most fascinating votes was actually even where they had a vote that almost failed, which is something that never happens in the legislature, because things never really get up to a vote without the outcome being determined.
And actually, like, that's just a very good point to highlight. So,
Yeah.
Because this is how it works at the federal level, this is how it works at the state level, is just to have the bill be debated on the floor basically means that the speaker already knows and has done a whip count of how the bill is going to go.
Exactly.
Right.
And so we only really get to hear, when we do get to hear any sort of a debate, any sort of a public vote, it's basically already because in the back room, like this Excel spreadsheet, they know the outcome. It's just like, that's just important for people, because most people don't get that that's actually how the government works. They think every bill has a hearing and everyone gets a debate and it's like
Exactly.
And it's all on the floor where everybody can hear.
No.
Yeah, and typically what happens is that that if there is a controversy, they'll recess and try to like make sure that they whip people into voting and then come back. Because the one thing that was fascinating, it was actually a good amendment that they passed, but they barely passed it. I believe the vote was something like 73 to 86. Which is flip that around, 83 to 76, or it was something like that, like something around like a 7-vote margin, which you never see. That's close. And it was a solid amendment. Didn't go far enough, but went better than the bill originally was, to make sure that if police are using a no-knock warrant, that they have to kind of certify that there are no children or elderly present.
Okay.
Yeah, I have things. So
Not far enough.
Yeah, not like it does not go. It's like it's seemingly basic.
You know
They shouldn't be allowed to use these at all.
Yeah.
And it just seemingly, it should be like non-controversial that even if you are somebody who's like so like pro-police in your mentality, like at least you can accept that maybe we could make these exclusions. And it barely passed. And from what I've heard, that they had to flip votes. So like that they actually had to tell people, no, you're voting for this, sorry, because we decided that this would pass. And like, the rare time that I think that's good, it's better that that passed than that didn't. But it's wild to think that something seemingly basic and nowhere near as far as it needed to be was so controversial in the Massachusetts
whole bill
House.
was that.
Yeah, there's so many of it. Like the central part of both bills was creating a certifying and decertifying commission that 45 other states already have.
Right.
And like I have heard that this version will be stronger, and that's great. I have some skepticism that they'll actually decertify that many cops.
Right. And how long will that take after how many abuses by a cop? And we can go into all
I was
the
gonna say,
details
so
of that,
let's actually set the table for this. Let's
Okay,
talk
yeah.
about,
Evan's got an arc. Evan's got
the
the
police
arc.
bill. So again, because we're gonna keep poking and jabbing at the meta thesis.
Yeah.
But then we also want to talk about these bills.
Yeah.
And so
meta thesis.
the meta.
We're in college
So,
now.
you want to learn more?
Is it meta piece time now?
Dude, this is gonna get insane. Like towards the end of this, like I have a very interesting arc of like how I want to take this journey. But for people who want to know just more about the internal workings of the State House, Act on Mass. All right, friends of the show.
And
Matt
what was
Miller,
that site
Erica
you posted?
Eidhoven.
Progressivemass.com had a
Progressive
great
Yeah.
data sheet.
Just
Yeah.
about the internal workings. We don't record votes. The speaker gets to do whatever he wants. I'm not sure if we've had a female speaker in the past. We may have. Does anyone know that? Has there ever been a female speaker?
No.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, never mind.
uh,
There's people who
There's
whip
been a
people into shape that aren't necessarily the speaker.
We've had female Senate presidents, and we do currently. The House is always
yeah,
the male.
okay.
Yeah.
And Act on Mass goes into that beautifully if you want to learn more about the internal workings. But now let's look at now the result of that is kind of legislation like this.
Yeah.
So everyone here who knows this. We had the George Floyd lynching. We had well over a month of street actions, tens of thousands of people marching in the street almost every day.
Oh my God.
Resulting in what we wanted to be some sort of a policy change.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this bill, I don't know if anyone did this, and you would know this if
Yeah.
I would have voted no against it because I would say this does not go nearly far enough to address the problems, and I'm not going to let you do a victory lap off of something so toothless.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone?
No, not any of that. Just I think just in some ways because of the internal politics of like seeing like since there was no mass to vote no on that way, it would if you don't have a mass of people willing to do that, and it's difficult to send a message.
Correct.
And because of, especially I think if you're in somebody's position like that, I can understand that when like the voices that you're hearing constantly are like every cop's wife, every cop's child, every cop's mom telling you to vote no, then the association of no is with giving them a win. But it didn't go far.
I mean, just as an example, like the Boston Police Association, Police Union put out an ad in the Herald saying, call your legislators to tell them about common sense police reform. So they are very effective at trying to figure that out.
Oh, yeah, they are. I mean, I've been trolling Blue Lives Matter rallies for the past couple weeks, and they keep growing in numbers. They have not only police union people there, but corrections officers unions there.
Yeah.
In front of the State House, we had a little bit of a tussle with them. And then they even said to me that some correctional officers who were told by their union to be there to protest the qualified immunity part of the bill, they said they were like so embarrassed that they were there. They're like, I didn't expect to come here with all these MAGA hats. Like, I don't even like Trump. My union boss told me to be here. I thought we were going to have an honest debate on qualified immunity, but they were really just trying to bring numbers out to show that basically we love cops and vote down police reform. And then even some of the people that were there to protest were like, what are we doing here? So they have a pretty good organizational strategy. And meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter, protesters, which I've also been out with every day, it is dwindling and it sucks. And it's dwindling. The energy's, the numbers are dying, and it's not, we haven't got enough.
I mean, John can go, of course.
No, go.
Okay. No, as an example, like the one vote that I still cannot get over, and the one that I still harp on sometimes before I go to bed is, how did anybody vote to say tear gas is a great idea?
Right?
Like that is just
I know.
That is just like a common sense, like no brainer decision. Like, why would you want to tear gas anybody?
And this
instead
climate,
we had people like China Tyler saying yes to that, and then being upset that anybody would be upset that someone would vote for that.
Yeah.
And we understand the logic between like these votes, right? Because obviously some of these votes are like decided before they even hit the floor, but it's just like this kind of nature of being like, oh my God, we're talking about police reform. We're talking about how my life matters. And they actually said it's okay to gas me because they felt threatened. That's just like shocking to me, the value of that. So when you see these like just no brainer issues, whether you want to call them humanitarian in nature or whether you want to call them just like human decency, like they can't even show up for some, like the people you expect to show up. They can't even do that.
And that's
because they want the bigger goal.
I think that's even that particular amendment is symbolic because like I've been tear gassed a million times. Like it sucks, but it's also not like, how about not like barging into people's doors and shooting them? That seems a little more important to me. And the tear gas thing is not even the main point of the bill that I was angry because that's like the easiest thing to vote on.
Yeah.
That's what everybody can agree on, right? Like
Everyone can agree that we should not allow the Boston Police Department to do what is actually war crimes as listed by the Geneva
it is a
Convention.
war crime.
Like,
it is a war crime.
that should just be like an open understanding. And I think part of them saying, no, we can do this is like, we will use whatever tools we think is necessary.
And it was comical to see people argue that, like, it's funny when you listen to reps try to argue against things that are so basic. Like, one argument that they're saying, but like if we ban, the way it was worded would also ban things like mace and other chemical sprays.
Which also sucks.
I don't want cops using those either.
Yes.
Or that they're like, well, if we ban tear gas, then they'll use attack dogs or something else. One, there was also an amendment to ban attack dogs. You could have lobbied for that. Two, nothing says that they need to be aggressive toward protesters.
Right.
You can think of other more creative ways, like with de-escalation.
That was like a lowest common denominator of the bill. That was like a low-hanging fruit that everybody could have voted for and said, we're here for police reform, and then voted no on everything else and still got no. Because like that was like, that's like, tear. I don't know, at least in my opinion, that seemed like something that would have been something so easy for everyone to get behind and then go home and say, we care about, the protesters, we're banning tear gas, and then do nothing else. Instead, they also didn't vote for to ban tear gas, which is like kind of like messed up.
One of the other things in the House,
and that's just like my personal thing. I don't know how, like, obviously there's a collective like frustration at that, but that's like one that I personally have, dude. Like, it's just like it's easy, like, who's gonna really be like, what the hell, how could you vote no against something like that? But here we are, right?
Yeah.
Another good example of something that seems so basic that still got voted down in the House, and it was actually in the Senate's bill, is something that says it was the language of a bill from Senator Mike Barrett that says that if a local police department wants to get access to military equipment, there needs to be a hearing of the city council, and there needs to be a city council vote. Like, honestly, we should ban that transfer entirely, but like, if you're looking for the most basic possible thing, saying that there should be some democratic process around it shouldn't be controversial, especially because like the police will probably win that vote, unfortunately, given like the politics of cities.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about military equipment for police. I come from Boxborough. It's a very small town. We have a Humvee. We have a police helicopter. We have more cows than most towns, and the most of what the cops did when I was growing up was chase us around for smoking weed behind the school. And they have all kinds of military equipment, but they don't have it because the town paid for it. They have it because Department of Homeland Security gave it to them. Mm-hmm. So I'm not even sure. I'm actually more curious to look into what that would, would the towns be able to ban DHS from just giving the cops this stuff? Because that's what... That's how they're getting it. It's not,
basically,
it's not the town's money.
It's called the 1033 program.
Mm-hmm.
It's been in existence somewhere around like the turn of the second Bush administration, like Iraq War. Basically,
post 9/11.
We have made so much stuff for the American war machine that is somewhat useless, and we need to make more because a lot of our only like thing
our
that
industrial
we can
policy
is to basically that's the only thing we can do. We can't make tests, we can't make Q-tips for COVID vaccines, but we can make guns and Humvees, and so. But
if only Humvees were the solution to COVID.
We'd be fine.
Want a Humvee.
Yeah, so the 1033 program basically lets the Army pawn off for free for local police departments this surplus military equipment, so then they can order more. Mm-hmm. You can stop that pipeline. You can say to your local police department, you are not allowed to accept or to request anything.
And that's what this was.
Basically, this is trying to restrict a city or a state's police force.
Okay. Because I was confused about whether it was from purchasing or whether it was for restricting. Because from my understanding, most of this stuff these small town cops have, they got for free.
No, exactly.
Yeah, but it's just
why not get a helicopter?
You
can get a helicopter for free. Why not get a helicopter? Well, but if you get that equipment, you use it. And there's been plenty of studies that show that the more a local police department uses the 1033 program, the more that they will actually use force. Because guess what? When you have all these tools, you use them. It's not that hard.
It's something that's a core part of the mentality when thinking of policing in general. Is that if you have different technologies and tools, you will use them. You're building a scenario where you're priming that use. And the same thing of like when you think of, do we need people with guns to like enforce the traffic? If they have guns, they will approach traffic enforcement in a fundamentally different way than somebody without a gun would.
Absolutely.
Like what I guess one of the examples that you could use in this is like it's Christmas for cops. With all these toys,
it is.
When you give them all these toys to use, of course they're going to get gassed up to want to use them because they have to. Like they paid for it. Why would you pay for it and not use it?
They didn't even pay for it.
Why would you take it if you don't?
They didn't even pay for it.
Why would you even take it if you're going to use it? But it's kind of like once they get these toys, they got to use them. And this is the issue is like, as Jonathan was saying, like if you have a cop use a gun during traffic enforcement, you get a different outcome versus one that does not. You're only simply giving out tickets versus like approaching someone with a hand ready to like pull the pistol. Like it's an insane perspective that we live in where we normalize people approving budgets for military equipment to begin with, as if like this is going to be Red Dawn in their neighborhood and they need to go to the vault and get it. And like I don't want to it just like amazes me that here is like the power of the purse and people are absolutely horrified at like reining in police budgets just based off of the military equipment. Like that's controversial to them and it shouldn't be, but for some reason police need, the latest surveillance equipment or the latest like drone to be put in the air, like whatever. I don't know, like whatever new is. Like,
they need to be armed to watch construction workers fill in potholes. That's a very dangerous
job. Yeah, like
job.
The details and shit. Yeah.
One thing that we can talk about more that they flagged the issue of qualified immunity as what people are protesting because that was a big flashpoint in the debate. It's something that the Senate tried to address, and it was one of like the main things that would actually yield some type of change that the House couldn't bring themselves to pass.
Just for the sake of the audience, do either you or Lauren, do you want to just explain qualified immunity?
Yeah. So it's a legal doctrine developed over years, in part out of Supreme Court rulings, that basically says that if a police officer can only be held accountable if there is an exact case in existing case law in which a police officer was held accountable.
And by held accountable, we're now talking about personally, and versus what normally happens if a police officer lynches someone, the city gets sued.
So you're actually doubly victim. It's like almost like a doubly victimization of the public.
Yeah.
So like the incentive for violating people's basic constitutional rights at that. And I think an example of the ludicrousness of this doctrine can really be shown by the examples that the defenders of qualified immunity give for why it's so important. There was a piece in WBUR earlier where this one lawyer who defends police officers talked about a case in which this one officer who that there was a woman, I think, outside of a hospital having a mental health episode. And this guy who was like 75 pounds heavier than her and like forces her to the ground and tases her. I think she wasn't able to successfully sue, and the guy was like, how would he know that tasing a woman having a mental health episode who's significantly smaller than him was bad? How possibly could he have known? And it's like that like what a twisted mindset for you to think that like no, I'm pretty sure that none of these cops are like, well, it isn't in case law that I've dutifully studied over the years of every single possible thing that is already proven wrong. Right? No, you need basic standards of what you can kind of do as well as have. And so basically, what the attempt in the Senate bill that's done, and it's similar to some other attempts at reforming qualified immunity, is to actually make it so that people can sue for civil damages in court when their constitutional rights are violated. But if it's something that you can generally agree, yes, that they should have known that what they were doing was illegal.
And really, like, this would just make legal what people already assume is the law.
Exactly. Right. Like, that was something that was wild to me. When I was making calls for kind of around for qualified immunity, and somebody was like, oh, if police officers do bad things, they already get fired. I'm like, no,
they really don't.
No, nothing happens to them.
This is America. You can sue anyone. Just like, no. Like, that's been drilled in your head to make you think we don't need any sort of like policies that we just sue each other. Just like that isn't how this actually works.
And as well as the other kind of thing that it happens is like, not only do you have the cases that got brought up end up getting dismissed, is that there would be a whole universe of cases that will never even see the light of day because people know that they won't advance. So that if you know that if you're a lawyer and you need to like you want to win something, you're going to be less likely to take up a case if you think it's just going to go down because the courts will always rule in favor of the police. It's like you're not even allowing it to go through the process of like, yes, the judges are already stacked and tend to be biased toward police, and so do juries, and there's a whole problems in the whole criminal justice system beyond that. but you're not even allowing them to. I'm just dismissing them. There was also one thing that was addressed in the Senate bill that the House didn't even touch is a flaw in the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act that says that that unless something is by threats, coercion, or intimidation, it's not a problem. When, like, you can think of, it's difficult to, there's a kind of a whole realm of possible constitutional rights violations that they'll allow pass. Like, well, there was no direct threat made to the person. Even though, like, the examples of the stories that will be this, of, like, that senators gave of things that were called as, like, not threats, coercion, or intimidation, or, like, police officers attacking people, or police officers, like kind of, like, strip searching people in public, or other kind of blatant violations of rights.
Yeah.
That I'm like, because they claimed no threat, coercion, or intimidation, sorry, we can't do anything.
I mean, that's pretty threatening, coercive, and intimidating.
Exactly, like the very presence
all
of police, the very presence of the police officer is in many
Yeah.
ways a form of threats, coercion, or intimidation because of the power that they have vis-a-vis a civilian.
So, to get back onto qualified immunity in terms of what actually passed, it ended up being extremely declawed.
So, like
In the House.
in the House,
Yeah, I
they
was
just
gonna say,
created a commission.
So right now, like, the Senate, they passed their bill. The House, they passed their bill.
Yeah.
And in whatever you call the reconciliation period.
Yeah, so they currently now have a conference committee going on. It was appointed of that you have 3 members of the Senate, 3 members of the House, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican from each, reconciling a bill. And so that's one of the flashpoints of issues, because the House passed a very narrow, very kind of watered down version of qualified immunity reforms that says that a police officer can only be held accountable if they've been decertified.
Which we don't even know how long that process
Exactly, we don't
takes
even know
and,
how-
like, what that even means yet, because that's also a new thing. So it's like extra steps.
Exactly. So you're putting another hurdle to that. You're also in a way of, like, given, like, I think it's like, as I noted, it's a problem that cities often have to pay for this. But if you know, if you have a commission that in many ways will probably have a bias for law enforcement, if they know that a police officer could be personally liable out of their own money to pay for damages if they get decertified, that could very well make them less likely to decertify cops.
And I still think, like, even qualified immunity to me is still going to be a very small marginal reform.
Yeah.
That just because they don't want it so much, like, I want us to pass it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But it will not
It's a drop in the bucket.
it will not address the much larger structural issues of the amount of funding
Yeah,
that police get,
exactly.
the use of the police in our society, so on and so forth.
Because the fundamental thing ends up being is that the best way of reducing incidences of police brutality is to limit the scope of policing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the best things when it comes to passing qualified immunity is just insofar as that restricts the power of police, especially given how they're opposition to it. But
Whatever the cops
I mean,
don't
one of
want.
the obviously one of the points you see them making is, well, this affects all public employees, and this would affect the teachers, and this would affect our firefighters, and this would affect our EMS. Anybody that would fall under this purview of qualified immunity, what you're seeing is a lot of the police unions use that argument as like a collective we, when really it's not about the teachers, it's not about our firefighters. It's about the police and what they do to the citizenry.
Exactly.
And this is the directive that we have to take. Now, I'm sorry, I just don't have empathy toward like that argument, because if police did good things, then we wouldn't really be here, right? Like we wouldn't be having this
That sounds
conversation about systemic things. And obviously we need to like shed a little light into what's going into our police departments, and QI is a way to do that. And it's unfortunate that the spooky nature of accountability is what scares most of these unions. And I'm sure there's other factors, other groups, whatever we want to call them, MAGA, I don't care. Like, it's just, we know that they have been very vocal on this perspective of, if you do this, it affects all public employees, including your teachers. Like, think about them. And it's kind of like, we're not right now because we're not worried about them.
That sounds like some
We
All
want them
Lives
to-
Matter.
I mean, like,
doublespeak
or
to
to phrase it
me.
another way, I will go on record saying that if a teacher lynches someone,
Yeah,
they can also be held to the same
like,
standard.
It's like if any public
This
employee
is-
is willfully violating somebody's basic constitutional
committing
rights,
war
that is
crimes.
also
Yeah.
a
Yeah, that's
problem.
okay. That's also a problem.
Like,
It doesn't
and you
happen
would
in the
see
same
that
way, but
you would see that response. Like if a teacher did something of that nature, you would see a public response that would be of fury, that would be of upset. But when a police officer does it, oh, it's hard, but it might be a misunderstanding. Let's hear all that. No, we've done that. We now need to be at that stage where, no, if they do something bad, they are in front of a board that is determining if that action is bad. And that board should be as independent as fuck. But who knows, who knows what the conference committee is going to come up with in this regard altogether.
And I'm not even sure that's enough.
Well, yeah, no, there's
to put somebody up in front of a board because they shot the wrong person when they went into the wrong house. Like, I'm not sure even that, like, this is just a start, but that's still...
Yeah, that's
still not even enough. I don't, that's like the whole systemic issue of like this is one thing that they don't want to get rid of is qualified immunity, but like it's still not going to stop cops from killing people.
Yeah, because it really does. So the one I was just going to make when it comes to with other unions is like if you have cases of a teacher having sex with a student, nobody really defends that. Or should defend that teacher.
The teachers
and
union
the teacher
doesn't
probably
back
gets fired.
Yeah. Sometimes they go to
it's
jail.
Just not defensible, It's just not defensible
Whereas,
to the degree at all. Like.
One thing that's like striking that it wasn't illegal already that got into this bill is saying that it's illegal for police officers to have sex with people in custody, which is always rape because you cannot have consensual sex with somebody in custody.
And I mean,
unless you were also in custody.
let's just also repeat that because this is again one of those things people assume. It is legal in Massachusetts for a police officer to have sex with somebody in custody.
Yeah.
Which again, how can you give consent if you are in handcuffs in the back of a car being told that you're going to go to prison for 10 years unless X, you have sex and then you still don't get in trouble? Like there is no just society
honestly, the
that would exist
strip
with that.
searches are like practically that.
Yeah.
So, like,
and now, unless there's any remaining thoughts on the police bill.
This is the one thing when it comes, especially with the qualified immunity stuff, to me, one of the few parts of it that actually has meaning. Just an encouragement to people to contact their legislators to say if they're going to if they're passing police reform, it should actually have teeth.
Yes. Teeth.
And now to take this, because remember, we are talking about super blue progressive Massachusetts that cannot pass these things that most people just assume are already laws because it doesn't make sense that it would work the other way.
Yeah.
And so now this kind of brings us back to the meta thesis of tonight, which is
meta thesis.
Which is
why?
Oh yeah, just wait.
How deep are we going here, Evan?
Which is why.
The meme of the guy with like all the equations.
Basically, like the Charlie Day with the thing.
Literally,
I was thinking Inception. I was ready to go 5 levels deep now on this.
Yeah,
shit,
but we have to build to it, and
everyone
jump in on this because what it means to be a Democrat and what it means to be a Republican. That means something different at the national level than it does to me in different states and different capacities. And this is my thoughts on it, and want to hear other people. And basically, my view of it is really since the Carter administration, later 1970s, there has been no economic distinction between the Democrat and Republican Party at the national level. There's been no distinction in foreign policy. The battleground has been cultural issues. Things like gay marriage, things like a woman's right to choose. And that has been like the major debating points up until 2015 or the 2010s. Things start to split in both. But at the state level here in Massachusetts, like those issues are more or less resolved where they come to protecting a woman's right to an abortion, a woman's right to autonomy of her own body, where it comes to the gay marriage issue. And so that is not a battleground that we fight. People identify Democrat or Republican kind of based on those cultural issues, but the Democrats have won that cultural fight.
Although not entirely. So
okay.
I
no.
I
mean specifically the raw things. But
just because we have gay marriage and shit like that doesn't mean like we have actually accomplished this like equal rights realm of progressivism. Like I get where you're leading to though, you know.
It's been social, not economic issues.
At the national level. Yes. Again, from the Carter administration until I'd argue the 2010s, where you start to see splits within both parties. You start to see the Tea Party movement and the Republican Party. You start to see at least like the beginning seeds of the Black Lives Matter movement, culminating, we'll say, or winding up with the Bernie Sanders in 2015, and now kind of leading towards internal ideological shifts. The Republican Party has gone full Tea Party, full just the most right-wing the Democratic at the national level has the seeds, even though there's a handful of members doing this to try to expand some economic things, maybe some foreign policy. But at the state level, and now this is my question, question to the panel.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a Democrat in Massachusetts? What does the Democratic Massachusetts Party
Are
stand
you looking for like a serious answer or like a funny answer first? Because I don't know what
you
guys
can
have to think about this.
You can lead with the comical as your jab, and then I want the hook to be actually. I'm genuinely asking this.
Yeah.
Because I know you sit on a award committee.
Yeah.
And like just genuinely, what does that mean?
Yeah. So I'll just note a few points. One thing that I'll actually say that, that's kind of the interesting dynamic is that like when it comes to although in many ways that there was a fight on social issues between the parties over the year, like especially since 70s, the Democrats were terrible for a long time at the time on these issues. So it's not even a perfect analog.
Absolutely.
That one thing that's wild to think about is that this is actually the first time in history that there was a pro-choice majority in the U.S. House. Because there wasn't when Democrats had their large majorities in 2006 or 2008 or any time before, like in 1994. Or sorry, 92 when after that election, the Democrats had.
And then also to build on your point, wasn't Obama term 1 still just being like they should have civil unions?
Exactly. Yeah. So like it took a while for him to even get there, and then for Democrats to get there on marriage equality. And you had DOMA under Bill
Joe
Clinton.
Biden made him move.
So like
Joe Biden made him move on that.
So you often had like a kind of in the Clinton years where you didn't actually have that great a policy, but an idea of that the upper ranks of power should have representation across, so that you would appoint more diverse people, even though you actually didn't want to change the laws to help people. But that actually itself was even a cultural flashpoint of who should actually be in the upper echelons of power, as opposed to just like predominantly white, predominantly male. The one way that one way I often describe that of a difference between the parties is that since there was never really the full emergence of a labor party in the U.S., you have a case where the Democrats end up viewing themselves as a party of both labor and capital, and that creates a fundamental conflict. And actually, I'll take a step back because one of the most interesting books that deals with kind of the weird nature of parties in the U.S. Was this book called Right Turn. The authors are Thomas Ferguson, and I forget Rogers's first name, and they were writing in the 1980s when there was a whole discourse about how after Democrats had lost to Reagan twice, and then people were saying that the problem was that the Democratic Party was too left wing, and that we needed to go.
Yeah, this is the McGovern.
So when you have that whole kind of mentality that the problem is that the party's too left wing, we need to shift right. And one of the fascinating things was they're looking at thinking of what a political party is, because a political party, if you're going to have a party, you need two things. You need people to fund you and people to vote for you. And the kind of New Deal kind of coalition that Democrats managed to have was a kind of brought in labor and the elements of the business world that were willing to sit in coalition with labor. So if you were a capital intensive industry, that's fine for you. So like that's why for a long time the oil industry was aligned with Democrats. It's more capital intensive than it is labor intensive. It's why tech is often aligned with tech industries often in the Democratic camps these days. It's more capital intensive than labor intensive, as well as kind of export oriented firms back then, because as long as they could get the trade policy they wanted, they're fine. They domestic, and then some aspects of commercial banking were willing, kind of coming out of the New Deal, to allow, could be okay with labor getting something too, because it didn't hit them too much. So as long as you could still like export everything to foreign markets, get kind of your kind of financial structure there for you, and be protected, kind of have some protections, you were fine, you were willing to allow that to exist. And then kind of coming in the 1970s, you ended up having that not be able to happen at the same time, especially when you had the changes in the international kind of economy coming up then, as well as a number of let's say like national independences. So you have like kind of both new countries and
the OPEC
markets.
crisis in the 1970s. You also had the loss of profitability of capital in the late 1960s that says we need to make our money somewhere else.
Exactly.
But now, because I only want to talk about the national history, but no, bring it to Massachusetts.
So just quickly to finish that out. So it ended up kind of creating like basically a fundamental tension where you basically, that to some extent, given the U.S.'s power in the world, you were able to a certain extent satisfy both labor and segments of capital at the same time. But in a different international kind of economic environment, you really couldn't. Mm-hmm. You really had to make a choice. And for the most part, the Democrats, starting under Carter, said, well, the investor class are the ones that are more important to us because they're the more powerful one. So that's why you didn't really see that many labor reforms. When it comes to, say, in Massachusetts, I will say that there are some things that aren't as big of flashpoints as, although like abortion isn't entirely something solved here with like the failure of the Roe Act. Demonstrates, considering the fact that the Catholic Church does still have a decent strength in Massachusetts of being very opposed to.
Oh man.
So that with like the Roe Act, which would have allowed like kind of either like late term abortions in cases of like kind of if the mother's health is at risk or kind of cases like that, making sure that in Massachusetts, if a teenager wants an abortion, they have to go before a court, have to rule that rules them in like.
That's so messed up.
You can make your own decision. So we're I think that the best description of it that somebody from NARAL described it is we're like a middling Midwestern state when it comes to this, but we're not like a Kansas. We're not like an Alabama. We're not where there's like an aggressive all-out assault, and it's an issue that isn't actually even a clear one between parties because a lot of Democrats are also the problem.
But are they the problem on those issues in Massachusetts, or I feel like they're more of a problem in terms of, conceding to what developers want or what cops want? Like a lot of them will, obviously the driver's licenses for immigrants has been going on for forever, and that's been like a ridiculous ongoing battle that should be obvious. But in terms of those social issues, I feel like the Democrats here, a lot of them, like rank and file, long time sitting Democrats, it's more like they're not, I don't know if they're church members. I feel like they're just like money.
Sam, did you have a...
I was going to say being a Massachusetts Democrat means, you're focused on the economic success for as far as someone can take it. Like, you're not necessarily, like, in Massachusetts, it is still very hard to file for unemployment. In Massachusetts, it's very hard to find the economic securities that you need during this pandemic. The reason it is because that's just the way the systems are designed. And that's been since even when Deval was in power, like that's just one of those things. And what has bugged me about Massachusetts Democrats is that they don't want to necessarily take the risk of thinking about others. Think about the gas tax. Think about like anytime we do talk about a tax increase, we're supposed to believe that, here's the public polling that, whether it's MassInc or another group, whatever, the public polling always seems to say we are ready to move into a new direction in some way. We're ready to evolve on the issues. And yet the stagnant establishment Democrats that we have, unfortunately, don't believe in that polling. They don't believe in taking those risks because at their districts where they represent them, it affects them. I know there's one, progressive legislator out west that, we all can adore, but I know for certain that they will just not vote for a gas tax because they believe that it is regressive toward their population. I could understand that perspective, but at the same time, if we're going to talk about expanding different ways of transit, whether it's rail, whether it's teleportation, I'm kidding on that. I've always just wanted it. Like, it doesn't...
Filed a teleportation amendment to a transportation bill.
I mean, seriously. And it's just one of these things where if we count on people to kind of take these risks and like escalating that, they should do so. And we don't see that. What we're going to see is a lot of like the timidity of that conversation, like the Transportation Climate and Climate Initiative, TCI. That's not necessarily a tax beyond it being on carbon. Like, we're all sucking it up anyway, and people are actively against like something like that because that is something that they think affects their wallet, and that's what most Massachusetts Democrats that have some kind of financial security think about. It's not about the person that, lost their home and, they're trying to figure out how to pay the rent and then how do I put food on the table. It's literally about the people in the suburbs that you don't necessarily would have thought about to begin with, but that's who this state actually thinks. That's what this Commonwealth actually thinks about, unfortunately.
Yeah, leafy green and liberal.
This, like, yeah, like we tout ourselves as like this iconic like beacon of liberal ideas, but really when we think about it, your transportation sucks, your schools suck, you can't afford nothing. Like if we were actually doing what this idea is, we would see that, and we don't because there's not enough Massachusetts Democrats to believe in it. And let's face it, we are purple, not blue, and that is something that we need to like embrace at this point.
The one thing that I think that gets to is as well, which is a kind of a weird case in Massachusetts, is that Massachusetts is a overall compared to other states viewed as a fairly blue state, but it's not at all because we're a diverse state. Whereas like a state like California is a very diverse state, right? Massachusetts is, for the most parts of the state, very white, which ends up creating a very different kind of a different politics than a California case. And like a book that I think is actually a great read about like the weird dynamics of Massachusetts politics is this book by Princeton academic Lily Geismar called "Don't Blame Us," and it looks at Massachusetts and the evolution of suburban liberalism.
Don't blame us. Yeah.
And it looks at like
now we're getting to some of the bigger themes. Suburban. Keep going.
And kind of, the one thing that I feel like it kind of evinces a certain type of mentality of Massachusetts politics is the existence of the Metco program. For those who don't know, because it comes from if you're a suburbanite, and that means that you don't want to change the housing policy to actually allow people to afford to live in your suburb. And you don't want to change tax policy, so you might actually offer more money to help urban schools, but you'll take a few students each year. You won't even offer them the supports that they need, but you'll take a few of them and you'll feel good about it. Is definitely like a strong mindset within that, and I feel
that's like saying that's like putting the Black Lives Matter in your front lawn.
Yeah, exactly.
And then really those same kids you'll call the police on if it's after 5 o'clock.
Right.
And that's like one of the things that that's unfortunately one of the things we do see is what do they always say? Progressives or whatever we want to. It's that kind of mindset, and that's. I don't know if Jonathan's actually alluding to that, but that is something that I do feel, in this state as a Massachusetts Democrat and as a black man. It's very hard to navigate the space of this when I know that people that look like me, a lot of Karens out there, that kind of bullshit. But it's just like there's not a lot of people that look like me on the Hill. And I know the sacrifices that those people on the Hill have to make to like actually succeed. But at some point, like, it just hurts a lot when you get we say that we are Massachusetts Democrats, but then you just constantly look at the voting record, like Nick Collins voting against, qualified immunity. Like, here's a guy that has zero qualms, like counting riding the coattails of just every progressive. But then when the actual showdown happens, he votes against it and then has to write some like long drawn out letter, like detailing the reasons why, when it's like, there's no reason why. Look at who you represent you. And he's going to get away with it. Like, that's no question. But that's one of these Massachusetts Democrats I'm talking about, is that they get to represent a district where it is, very diverse to the degree that it needs to. And the power centers that exist in it continue to elect people that don't want to actually push that needle to do what is necessary. And look at where we are now, where we're still debating police reform, and we're still debating, like, education. We debate everything all the time when we know that the actual basic human circumstances of the actual human services people need, we still can't get them to them.
And, all right, so Sam just set me up for the next topic.
Okay.
I have to go back to what John was just saying. Is because the Metco program is a great example of this, what I wanted to highlight. And everyone here knows about like the busing crisis in the 1970s here in Boston, where students from like Roxbury were shipped to Southie, vice versa. Again, massive racism, attacks for the segregation. Something that gets underreported during that narrative when we talk about it is the extent of hatred that Southie people not just had towards the black students and the black families coming into the neighborhoods, but towards the suburban readership editorial pages of the Boston Globes that kind of like looked down on those people, saying, "Oh, look at how racist those white people are," whereas they were living in suburbs that were completely walled off, segregated, which they escaped to get away from a black population in Boston, and now we can go to the next part, which is basically the problem of who votes in our elections and the fact that we have one of the least contested elections. And for me, this entire thing, one of the larger points, not the metathesis that's coming later,
Oh, the metathesis.
is that this is the Massachusetts Democratic Party is basically a jobs program for what I'll refer to as mediocre white men.
Yes.
Who do not have any challenges. Like, how many races right now,
I mean,
Jonathan?
like, you want us to...
Well, one funny kind of stat with there. I believe this is correct, and I believe that there are more white men named Dan in the Massachusetts House than there are women of color.
I think I saw you tweeted that.
I thought it was Mike.
See, this is what we brought you here for. This is exactly what
there
we
are
wanted.
160 seats in the Mass House. How many are being challenged? Or how many? Like, isn't it like?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but most people spend their whole lives without ever getting a contested election, and that ends up having and so you end up having kind of this weird situation in Massachusetts where the one thing I think is kind of on the flip side of looking with the Republican Party is the Republican Party has money but no infrastructure. Is how I describe it in Massachusetts. If you have money but no infrastructure, you can win statewide. You can win a governor's race by carpet bombing the state with ads, as well as because you
Also, because Martha Coakley was your opponent. Let's not forget.
Right. As well as a certain type of like typically of like a certain affluent suburbanite who, if you have a Republican who presents well, and even our Republicans are better than other states' Republicans, that you can get by with a lot of money. But Republicans don't have an infrastructure.
No.
So that means that like. The thing that's funny to me is, so you currently have, I believe it's 32 out of 160 are Republicans in the House. And that's actually high compared to what it was a decade ago. That like in the 2010 wave, I believe, I think it was 2010 when Republicans increased their numbers from like 12 to like 35 or something like that. And it was like, oh my God, like Democrats are spooked, but like, they're still like such a tiny minority in the scheme of things. There was just even a smaller minority before. But they don't have Republicans just don't have the ability to contest that many races and it's something that's not really necessarily a result of the drawing of districts. It's just that it'd probably be very difficult to draw that many Republican districts in Massachusetts.
Doesn't matter if the Democrats vote right.
Well, yeah,
anyway.
But no, just talking about even with this is how, so you have people who don't have they don't have to earn their keep.
Right. Well, there's tons of Democrats like that too.
Yeah. So like, no, I'm saying that when it comes to a Democrat, if you expect to never have a Republican challenger, and you expect to never have a primary challenger,
right?
You're just there to cut ribbons.
Yeah.
That's literally like just your day job.
And
that's
there's
your
no
job.
actual motivations for a Nick Collins, Dan Hunt, people who represent like minority majority areas to actually vote in the interest of those people, because you right now don't have a challenger seat. Just go take money from some people, stay in your jobs program, go cut rhythms. Maybe you get to hang out with a Celtics player every now and then. I don't know what they do. I think according to Ballotopia, we are ranked dead last compared to states in terms of competitiveness in our elections. If you will look at 2017, like an off-year election cycle during the primaries.
Yeah.
Voter turnout, I think in some areas, was just over 1% of registered of eligible voters. Like I can bring up the actual numbers, but like between 1 and 5%.
Oh yeah,
like people that actually participated.
Yeah, no, I know in 2014 in like the student heavy areas of Boston, it was like, I know that the BU precinct had like 1.7% turnout in the 2014 primary.
This is why it's so great to vote in these elections.
Well, this
and
I mean,
so fun.
And maybe we're entering into how do we solve this problem territory.
Well, it doesn't matter if they don't vote.
Well, I mean, if you are, as a point is like one of the great things about this election cycle, right, is we do get a mail-in ballot. So maybe there is this like hopefulness that one of the solutions to actually like increasing voter turnout, increasing like voter engagement is this process. Who knows what could happen in September? Who knows what could happen in November with this going on? And this is like this is an incredible test case where if this goes smoothly just for September, you have a great example that you get to use passing that along as the standard of, well, now if we've done it once, maybe we can do it again. Maybe it increases voter engagement. The issue, one of my concerns is like the power structures of wanting to suppress the vote, where you don't necessarily want everybody to be engaged in it. Because who would want, like, we know the names of like those that deserve to be primaried. Like, would they really want a primary right now? Like, look at Ed Markey right now. Like, he's got to deal with a primary during a mail-in ballot against Joe Kennedy. Like, that sucks. And we're debating over which one is more Democrat enough. So I think one of the solutions to this is like testing this like mail-in ballot thing. But, big picture, we need more access to elections where it's just like we need the holiday or we need to have the election on a Saturday.
Holiday.
Like these are all the things that we've like any progressive or leftist, whatever it might be, has been saying for ages now, which is like if you increase voter turnout, you probably get less, apathetic voters, and we can't do that. We haven't been able to do that, and we're finally getting the window now to like see how that turns out. Like, my hope is that with this mail-in ballot kind of thing, we actually can justify saying like, look how easy it is finally to vote. And this is kind of what we've all wanted for a very long time now. And it took a pandemic to explore that. Why you imagine if there wasn't a pandemic, how much easier it would just be. And
so the one
people
thing
are spooked by that.
On voting that I've thought of before, when like Massachusetts still doesn't have election day registration, which is a basic reform.
Which was voted down this year.
Yes, exactly. It was voted down this year. It's something that most other New England states have, that Maine and New Hampshire have had it for a while. Massachusetts still doesn't. And the one thing that's kind of interesting to think about when it comes to voting laws, right, which Democrats nationally talk a lot about, and in other states are much more prominent, and we're always horrified when, like, the thing I laugh about is that if Republicans in another state were to roll back the number of early voting days to just what Massachusetts allows, Democrats in Massachusetts would be horrified, even though that the result would still be actually better than what Massachusetts currently has. Is that parties in many ways will act in self-serving ways, right? That's what you would expect. So that if you're in a state where you have an unstable majority, or where there's the real ability to fall from a majority to a minority, you would want to take actions to help keep yourself in the majority. So that voting rights, it's why voting rights are a flashpoint in many ways, because if you believe that that kind of marginal voters are predisposed to come out for Democrats, you would want to make it easier for marginal voters to participate in the elections if you believe that's something that can actually determine whether or not you hold power. If you don't believe that that has any impact on whether or not you hold power, because the elections aren't contested, why do you care?
Yes.
It becomes just from a matter of principle that the idea of it's good for people to participate in elections or something like that, which most elected officials don't hold.
well, because like to get to your point, because it is not within their rational interest, because there is no pressure towards them to do that. If we had a rival, if we had a strong Republican Party. Oh, did we lose Sam? 2 people calling in.
Can we do 2 people? This will be nuts.
Maybe we just lost Sam. But like without a primary challenges of people who might lose. Without another party that, hey, guess what? If we're in power, you lose your chairmanship.
Exactly.
That money's coming to me now. Then there is no incentive to expand voting. There is actually no incentive to get up the vote. There is no incentive to maybe pass policies that some of your constituents want.
Exactly, that would like energize your constituents, because you're never at risk for losing that. And with something like election day registration is viewed by far too many Democrats as a threat to them, because they don't know what their electorate is. And especially Democrats who end up having, some of the Democrats with college-heavy districts are especially afraid of it, because
they should embrace it.
Exactly, you should earn their support of the college students in your district, all of those potentially new voters. But they view it as just, I don't know who those people are turning out to the polls, and that's a risk to me, right? That the risk is never that they could lose their seat in a general election, that they could lose power. It's that anything that heightens turnout could be people that they don't know. So it ends up creating leads to a fundamentally risk-averse system, as well as kind of which aligns as well to the general aspect of how this is. It's becoming more of an issue in the Senate, but it's more salient of an issue in the House, is a desire to flatten the differences between everybody in the party, so that there is diversity of it. There are people who are generally progressive, some outspoken, some like nominally progressive, and some quite conservative. And if you view your main goal as preserving the power of keeping every single person in your overly large majority protected, you don't want to take many votes because you don't want to reveal the splits between them. You want to flatten it out to only the things that have full consensus and that you'll vote on. We've seen that it's not as problematic, but we've seen that to some extent on the national level as well. If you look at what Democrats are willing to take up, Democrats are not going to take up votes on the national level that don't have the overwhelming command of the Democratic caucus. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to take votes that they'll only pass by one vote. Even if so that you end up having, the thing that annoys me is my the district I grew up outside of Philadelphia, is one of the only districts that Clinton won that has a Republican rep, and Democrats end up nationally flatten things to the point where that Republican rep is willing to vote for them some of the times, rather than actually trying to push something and acknowledging that having defections is okay if you pass better policy.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, like for me, now we're going back to a national level.
Yeah.
Like, what they are making is a rational strategic choice of, we are just going to appeal to the margins of the suburban voters. So let's nothing that threatening. Let's peel off a couple percentages in this state or that state, and that's fine. That's not, because they don't actually, it's been said before, the Democratic Party isn't really a political party because they don't have an agenda they're trying to do. The Republican Party has an agenda.
Yeah.
They have a goal and a mission that they're trying to accomplish at the national level. The Democratic Party is let's just have these nice jobs. We can go to cocktail parties where we're the good people fighting against the evil Republicans, and it's a jobs program.
The one thing that I think one way I framed it in terms of what the number of politicians lack is a vision for how society could be in any way other than it is. Right? So that if you end up lacking that in your mentality for, let's say, as a party, as a politician, you're never going to get that far because you don't actually have the idea that society could be structured in any different way than it is. Even not even, let's say, total overhaul, but just that that certain governing principles or structures would look different than they are. And so if you don't have that, you can have a basis of modest amelioration so that you can do slight steps to minimize the suffering that exists in the world. But you fundamentally don't have an approach of society looking any different than it did.
Correct, I agree with that. All right, so I'm going to call this the Sam thesis is we need to expand voting access, voting opportunities to get more people participating in the electoral process, to have some sort of a pressure or change. To say,
it's more than that, though.
I don't know. I know.
You're talking, it's like money. It's it's just it costs money to run, right? I feel bad for women in particular, especially women of color that have children and they have to balance all this bullshit, and then to run for office, to make the sacrifice to do that, it's a lot. The barriers of running for office are very real, and you have all these great organizations out there that obviously are trying to correct that, right? To get these types of people that want to figure out what a future looks like for the Democratic Party or for Massachusetts, in office. It's just so expensive. And I think obviously one of the great things that if we could have in Massachusetts, to say the least, is public elections, right? I remember one of the first things that blew my mind about Massachusetts politics, or just about running for office entirely, is how Jay Gonzalez and Charlie Baker were running against each other, and Jay Gonzalez can only get so little money out of public financing to compete. And it obviously became clear that, this is just the law that allows it to be what it is. But you wonder if we did have publicly financed elections where everybody had kind of the same level playing field, and it didn't require all this outside influence, or it just didn't require the same old power players and going through the Rolodex saying, can you write me a check? Can you write me a check? If you actually had robust elections that were structured in a way that allowed people to know these are your candidates, these are how they're running, these are what they care about, you would probably see more people run for office. You'd get more active, spicy primaries and elections. But because of the cost prohibitive nature of running for office, you just don't see that enough. And that's one of the things that obviously just sucks the most. And I personally would like to see that corrected, because what happened in Boston in last election cycle, just seeing all those people run, it was crazy, and it came down to one vote. But that's what people deserve. That's what
right.
people should have. That that we should have a ton of people running and debating the ideas. And if it takes forever to actually get to that, and then we can just say, okay, everybody vote. Okay, that's how it is. But there's just such a hindrance for people to run for office. Like if someone got Julia McKee on the phone being like, how much debt are you in right now? Like I would be shocked at like seeing that number, like being like, this is what it is, right? Like it's like buying a new house. It's like buying a new house or buying a new car or going to school and getting a master's degree, right? Like you just take on all this fucking debt that you're eventually going to have to pay off to do the right thing. Like it's just awful. And maybe that's one of the issues we have and why we don't see a diverse like state house and why our elections are so difficult.
And then I know Jonathan has a point. I think Lauren has a point. I was going to just say, and it's almost like a little bit of like a chicken or an egg thing, because in order to pass legislation that will have public financing of elections, you need to get new people in. But the only way to get new people in is to make it easier to raise the money. So the people in office really don't have a rational incentive to pass the policies, which will make it easier for challengers to emerge. Seattle, to me, is the best example of this, where they give everyone like $100 of like voting bucks.
Yeah.
Extra bucks.
And so every
voting bucks.
so every registered voter gets basically a free $100. It says, hey, register to vote. We'll give you $100 that you get to spend on any campaign of your choice. And now people are like, oh, I get a free $100. I'm actually gonna like look into this.
Yeah.
I might actually vote. I might actually volunteer.
Yeah.
And like, but again, how do we get people to pass that where it is not within their interest to pass it, because it will create an opportunity for challenges?
Well, yeah. So the one other thing I was going to note, which relates to the kind of money and barriers that Scan was talking about, is that you also have the barriers to information in the first place, or participation, beyond just participation as a candidate, because it's often difficult to figure out what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to have kind of that we have a weak sense of I think we have a weak sense of political efficacy in the U.S. So like that ability to think that engaging in the political system will yield change, especially because
it hasn't for decades.
Exactly, because like the fact that it often hasn't reinforces that the fact that it's difficult to figure out how to participate in the first place makes that difficult. It's difficult to find information about how to participate. It makes it. And that you have, let's say in Massachusetts, two different dimensions as well when it comes to information. One are people who are struggling and just like there are so many taxes on their time that paying attention to stuff is just another tax on their time that it's just not something that they're going to spend time on, right? You also have the dimension in Massachusetts politics where people think that Massachusetts is fine.
Yep.
And it's why people in Massachusetts would often rather work on elections in all 49 other states.
Ugh.
Rather than elections in Massachusetts. And because if you think that it's fine, it's also like,
oh, let's go make phone calls for Joe Biden now. And I'm like, there's like a bunch of good... Yeah,
if you look at an example of last night, like Cori Bush, like, everybody wanted to get it, everybody wanted to help her in some way because they knew that this was like some kind of like moment. Whereas like here, you're never going to like, I don't know, maybe, I mean, Ayanna Pressley and herself, right? Like doing the upset against Cap. But like in these examples, you're seeing these like moments where if the national attention isn't happening in your area, then everybody's just going to say it's fine. Like it's not. There's nothing to worry about.
And if anyone does think it's fine, Massachusetts has somewhere between the 5th or the 8th highest income inequality.
Yeah.
We have a 33-year life expectancy differential. Like people who are born in Roxbury have the same life expectancy as basically like towards the mid 19th century, like before like indoor plumbing, like 56, 59 years old. Where 2 miles down the road, I think it's closer to 90, 92.
Yeah.
Third most gentrified city in America, Boston. So if anyone thinks we're doing fine by whatever metrics you use, please let me know what the metrics are, because life expectancy for me is a big metric that I bring up a lot. I'm just measuring how well are we doing.
Yeah.
I want to just say in terms of, I guess, sorry to troll, but I'm not trolling actually. If anybody wants to put their money where their mouth is and complaining about people not running, I would love to hear somebody in this room or on this phone call announce their candidacy for the State House. Does it have to be me?
Yes.
No. I made the statement that basically if We are not going to have. I said this at like a Dorchester neighborhood meeting. We will never again not have a challenger for either that's Fred Banker, state rep, senator. We are going to make people sing for their supper. If
Yeah,
that means
please
that
do it.
that means that I have to run in every single election simultaneously on the
Yes.
ballot, I will do that.
Some would call you an Althea Garrison.
Yes. If I have to
That actually
become,
reminds me of. This,
Oh
this
my
is-
God.
But
this
but
is-
then again, like think about it though. Like here we are. Like we're laughing about her, but I mean she does run a lot.
Dude,
and
Althea
she's never
Garrison
been-
is
so it's
hardcore.
It's actually why, like, one thing that if I had the skills to do the skills of a documentary filmmaker, the one documentary I'd love to make is on perennial candidates.
Yes.
And to make it in a way that, like, slightly problematizes how we typically view perennial candidates. Because if you think about it, when we tell people how that people should run for office, right? You should get involved, right? And if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? So the perennial candidate is in many ways taking those at their word.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're actually embodying a certain
They're
form
walking the
of
walk.
civic virtue. They're often also completely bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
But it's this fascinating.
Vermin Supreme.
Exactly. So it's this fascinating tension of like the best epitomes of civic virtue are also some of the most like kind of bizarre
Dr.
human
Shiva.
beings. Exactly. And just to actually like engage with that as a question would be a fascinating documentary to make.
no, I like it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. In fact, I think that I think you should run, Evan, and then we can make a documentary about
Yeah,
it.
stop trying to get me to run. We have plans for Dorchester. That's all I say.
Okay.
It does not rely on me
Can
running.
somebody run against Moran? That's all.
Simultaneously.
I've
Are
been
you in the
asking.
district?
Yes. I might do it. I don't know.
And
I
it's
don't have a
like
job.
Lauren set up the question just so then she can say, "Fine, I'll run."
Yeah.
This is all just like a ploy. The one larger point I wanted to make, and I don't know how you're doing on time,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
If for the sake of getting back, if we can wrap up like in the next like 5 minutes.
Well, he's got an arc.
No.
So get to your
We're
arc.
at the end of the arc.
Okay.
We hit what I wanted to, which is like we need to stop primarying. We need
Yeah.
to
I
make
want a
voting
name and
easier.
shame section, but
The major point that we did get to hit successfully is the reason that we don't actually pass anything is because there is no pressure to get them to.
Yeah.
yeah.
Whether that's financial pressure in terms of
And even the marching in the streets doesn't.
nope,
They just get used to it.
They were able to look at
Yeah.
people sleeping outside for 13 days
They're
in a
not
row
scared.
just to vote on something which again 15 other states have, I believe.
As well as the one thing that ends up happening that like with protests, especially in Massachusetts, is that a lot of legislators see protests and think, oh well, that's just everybody from Cambridge and JP here again, and that's not my district, and so they don't care because it's not like it's for them. One of the most interesting studies I remember seeing before is about how both Democrats and Republicans view their districts as more conservative than they are. That they had studied, I think, a number of congressional districts. I think they even looked at on the state legislative level. And the study had looked at opinions about marriage equality and single-payer healthcare, and they had asked Republican and Democratic legislators about what percentage of their constituents they think support these. And like the Republicans were wildly off, right? Like, but
20% support Sharia law.
Exactly.
just it's not a big
Republicans comically wrong,
Yeah.
but Democrats also overestimated they underestimated how the support for kind of liberal, progressive, whatever positions in their own districts. And you have a severe case of that in Massachusetts, and it does come to the pressure point because if you're hearing from like 5 conservative old white guys who constantly call your office about how terrible immigrants are, that's your view of your district.
And then you go home and you hang out with your friends who are all probably pretty wealthy at
Exactly.
the golf course, and this is all you also hear. And then you watch maybe MSNBC at night, and then you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, like this is the world. This
Exactly.
is like what it must be.
So that if they don't actually hear from that much, other than let's say those who are comfortable and those who are like the worst human beings, that it ends up having a massive skewing perspective on what they think that what they think that their district thinks. One point I always like to make is like granted not like that Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in more districts than Democrats hold in either house here. Obama actually beat Romney in 2012 in every single Senate district in Massachusetts, even the Republican one. So, like, grant that it kind of indicates that, like, not that all these districts are, like, great places or anywhere, but that, like, your district wasn't even racist enough to vote for Donald Trump. So, like, stop being afraid to pass basic things that other states have.
No, that's a good point. And so I wanted to read you all a quote.
Yeah.
Last point. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. You know who wrote that? The person who wrote our Constitution. John Adams. My meta point that we don't even have time to go into, which is fine, because I don't have too much on it, is that all of our policies, all of our laws, all of the structures, all of our constitutions were never meant to hold democracy within them. And the Project of America, from about the mid-19th century, when we allowed poor white people to vote, to when we tried to expand that towards what we did towards women and then towards people of color in the 1960s, is to try to jam democracy into a structure that was never meant to hold it. And that, to me, is still like the biggest failing at the national level and even at the state level. We have the oldest active constitution in the world, I believe, is that it was never meant to be a democracy. We have attempted through some weak-ass amendments to jam democracy into it, but it still does not reflect it. And to be honest, it probably can't. And with that...
All right, we're
On that positive note.
Wow. All right. I want to go through. Okay, now that you guys did your Ken Burns documentary on the history of democracy and everything, can I just go through some like freaking state house people that I think are awesome and or terrible?
All for it.
Like I want to talk some shit, and you're all talking high level stuff.
Yeah, I'm
and
done.
I came here to
Go
like
off,
talk
Queen.
shit. So,
Trying
all
to
right.
find a quote.
Yeah, but it's designed that way. Like it is a
Yes.
complex process. Like the ad that you guys had on earlier before you guys went live, like just how fast like someone could speak on
Yeah.
just even saying a roll call vote. Like this is how it's designed to be. It's designed to be complex, parliamentary procedure,
Every
that
single
kind of
vote
shit. Like
in the state
no
house should be
ordinary
recorded.
no ordinary person would understand that. But here we are try and comprehend that in the most basic way possible. And we have to comprehend that in a way where it's like people just want to pay the rent. And
Yeah.
we can't even figure that, we can't even streamline that kind of process to say, here's some cash, like solve that. So I understand where you're coming from about like, I'm fascinated how Jonathan just knows all this shit sometimes. Like, he understands the
A
rules.
wealth of knowledge.
He understands how, the players and who kind of like moves and shakes and all that stuff. It is fascinating. But as an observer, this is one of the more annoying parts is some people are just ordinary people and they just want to understand if their government is effectively taking care of them. And we can't even be transparent about that.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most frustrating things about Beacon Hill for me personally. So, I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, the transparency of all the voting up there has been extremely messed up for a long time. I was impressed with the amount of roll calls that were, like we spoke of earlier, actually recorded in like this lovely chart here I have in front of me. I wish I could have that for everything. I wish I could just look up a bill and see how everybody voted in committee.
Which is, again, what we assume exists.
Yeah.
This is what should actually happen, but it doesn't. I believe that Ann Callahan is running on a transparency-centered platform, which we may go into at some further point. I do want to, however, her opponent Christine Barber looks like already also voted correctly on all the police reform budget issues.
No, she did.
But I'm looking at this
Yeah,
here.
no, I can do in terms of shout outs to people who are really good on that.
We're talking police reform, just to...
With like in terms of actually in general for the session.
Okay.
Also I'll
Yes,
give shout
in
outs to
general.
people. Her birthday was recently. I'll give a shout out to Nika Alagardo.
Yeah, of course.
Love Nika.
Who's been great.
We got Connolly, we got Aguardo,
Exactly.
those the expected ones.
Then Lindsay Sabadoza out in Northampton is great.
Okay, awesome.
Maria Robinson and Jack Lewis in Framingham are both solid. Who else do I want to give a shout out to? Tammy Gouveia in Acton.
Yeah.
So
that's a different part of Acton then. So my friend just got elected a state rep.
Okay,
Dan Cena.
Yeah, he's also Acton.
Across the board, perfect
Yeah.
score so far.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is.
But yeah, Acton is split in between two. One of the many like weird districting.
Kind of like Brighton.
And we were talking about Somerville before. Denise Provo is good people, and
Yeah.
she's retiring, and hopefully Erica wins that seat to replace her. Denise is somebody who's like super smart. If you've ever had the like
Denise Provost is good.
Yeah.
And then a couple others. There was that guy from Watertown. Was
John
it?
Hecht.
Yeah,
John
that's
Hecht,
the
he's-
one.
yeah, he's
he was
very-
pretty good.
Good outspoken. Who's good? And then there are some people who are good on this issue. And I'll give credit for on the policing issue particularly. I'll give credit to Liz Miranda, who is the one who
Yes.
was outspoken on trying to make it a better thing. Natalie Higgins, I forgot to mention, who represents a district that isn't particularly progressive but is really solid. She's the former executive director of Phenom, the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, and represents Leominster.
Okay.
Which
cool.
nobody expects to be to produce
Yeah.
one of the most consistently progressive state reps. So that's always a
That's
always a
awesome.
positive when you can get
All right.
somebody good out of there.
And can I
Who
ask?
sucks?
I was gonna say, and this might be a wedge comment, and we don't need to go too
Ooh.
much into it. Do we know why Liz Miranda voted against the rent control amendment?
That I don't know because there are some people who both co-sponsored the bill
Yeah. What
and
was up
voted
with
against
that?
it. So that was bizarre to me. I actually wrote out who I have it. It's if you go to theprogressivemass.com, it's on the blog. I actually listed for all those housing votes who co-sponsored the bill then voted against it.
Which
Oh, I
we
missed
didn't
that
even get to. I mean,
Yeah.
We didn't even get to
no,
that.
now
is
now
so-
we've gotten full circle in the amount of
Exactly.
people who co-sponsor a bill and then the bill doesn't pass, and you're like, well. How, because mathematically you had enough people who co-sponsored it to pass it, and yet it doesn't pass. How's that possible?
Yeah,
Part of the many
and-
problems.
And it speaks to the structure of leadership where if with any amendment, if let's say if it's ruled in advance what will happen, right? This is the amendment that will pass, this is the amendment that will not pass. That there ends up being a pressure on people to fall in line. Which is always disappointing when people choose to.
So
And
can we just back up? Progressivemass.com is
Yeah.
the website where people can see these votes for themselves.
Yeah.
You do a lot of posting. Is this your site or your?
I'm the one who does a lot of the updating on it.
Yeah,
so.
and you've done a great job with it. I've been following it. So
Thanks.
people want to follow along if they keep releasing
Yeah.
data and roll calls. I post it in the chat, progressivemass.com.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to plugs yet, but I just wanted to let everybody know that's what we're looking at. I do want to, yeah, so Liz Miranda, who are some other...
Let's trash talk people now.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to
Okay.
get to. Thank you.
Yeah, so
I came to talk some shit.
now we're entering Sam's territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go off.
Okay.
Why don't you like talking trash?
That's
Evan?
not what I do.
Oh my
I love
God.
talking.
That's my favorite thing.
Exactly.
All
So
right,
can we-
let's go.
Let's round this up before I have to head
Okay.
home. Who
Yeah.
are we talking trash on?
So, well, we can always talk about DeLeo, but we don't even know what happened
So
backstage.
I'm happy. We don't have enough time for me to
Throw
share
some-
my
throw
opinions
some
about
name-
of everybody. If you want to go comically terrible, just go to Colleen Gary, who I don't even know why. Who's,
Yeah,
the
she's-
most, who's more Republican than the Republicans, despite being a Democrat.
What district is she?
She represents Drake-it.
Oh, weird.
And
okay.
so it was wild that there was they had voted to basically when Massachusetts still had a law that was basically saying that if women are on welfare have children that you shouldn't have children, we're not gonna give you money for them.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
William
Very
Galvin
progressive.
wasn't so good either.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's no such person. There are no good Bill Galvins.
There are no good Bill Galvins.
That's one of the
Wait,
rules
is he a
of-
different Bill Galvin than?
Yes, there are two Bill Galvins, and they're
Oh.
both bad.
Oh.
Blows your mind. That's why
Okay.
it's fascinating.
What about there's two Morans? There's two Morans in the state house. One of them
Yeah.
is mine. One of them is some guy named Frank, and they voted
Yeah.
exactly the same. Generally, yes. What was interesting was Honen's votes.
Yeah.
because-
Well. Okay. Continue.
Historically, he has been pretty anti-police reform and pretty pro-cop, and I think it's the primary that's really helped with that.
It's a fascinating thing to see both one, how people respond to primary challenges,
Yeah.
which is why you need primary
Yep.
challenges
Yes.
because people vote better when you have them. As well as the thing that's also interesting to watch with certain votes is when you get the impression that certain legislators had permission to vote differently from the speaker. Because if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
somebody who's very high ranking, the speaker will know if you're voting no, and if one people shouldn't have to get permission for how they vote on anything. But two, if you think that you need to vote differently from the speaker for political reasons, I'd rather that than you fall in line.
Yes.
That's still a step up because you realize, yes, my constituents think this is good. Maybe I should take even though it's just symbolic, vote to say I agree with you, constituents. I
Yeah.
want somebody to replace them who actually doesn't feel like they need that permission. But the fact that you actually had thought enough to think, maybe I should actually do this. Is like at least a step up in
And
the
that's
ranks
what's always striking to me, especially like the rent control amendment 66, like a blowout.
Yeah.
Like there were plenty of people who could have told like DeLeo, oh hey, like I'm gonna vote yes for this because we know it's not gonna pass, just so I can like just
Exactly,
like why wouldn't you do that? Like it doesn't make sense.
That's the thing that's
kind
wild
of your
to me,
job.
especially when you have people who like co-sponsor and then vote against.
Yeah.
Is that like it's symbolic.
Yeah,
ultimately.
yeah, exactly,
That,
exactly.
Like your vote isn't going to suddenly like scramble the speaker's plans and lead to the rent control amendment passing. It's just not going.
Like
to
you
pass.
could backroom deal and pass the correct way in a way that
Exactly.
I don't like, but at least like you're.
But at least like you're politically astute.
yeah,
enough.
yeah, like you're aware enough of like the reality. Of it.
Exactly. Like, and it's just a fascinating thing to me that more people don't at least even get that. That
Yeah.
like, that you're like, okay, I don't care to see this pass, but I know that I need to vote.
Yeah.
As though I think that it did. And like, frankly, it speaks again that why they need pressure, because if they have primary challengers, they realize it is important for
Yes.
them to vote as though they think something should pass, even regardless of what they actually think.
All right, I know Jonathan has to get out.
Yeah.
Wait, any more names before?
Oh, like mostly almost every single person that
I know.
Ron Mariano is
Okay.
is terrible. He's like the
Yeah, I
The-
just,
the-
I
the
just
way-
don't trust any of them. So I
I
mean,
don't
I
trust
don't
anybody in
I just
leadership.
don't trust any of them. You know?
Ron Mariano, who's like the number 2. I've basically heard it described as how like Bob DeLeo only really cares about casinos and everything else is negotiable, but
Yeah.
Ron Mariano is actually ideologically conservative in many ways.
Ugh.
That like the whole leadership team is fairly conservative.
Yep.
Mike Moran is a perpetual disappointment because he's
Yeah.
really opposed to election day registration because he's afraid that students from BU would actually vote.
He's also like in charge of the way our like whole Alston Brighton is completely bizarrely cut up, the way it is.
yeah.
Like that's his fault. He's also kind of weird.
As there probably
It's
so
funny
many
because
of
Mike
them.
He's
presents
weird and
himself.
sweaty.
It's
No, go Sam.
It's just, sorry, it's just funny because Mike presents himself as like this big Bernie guy. Like, you
Yeah,
know,
that's
I'm going to have your back. I always think it's we, not me. And it's like, bro, you vote a hell of a lot. Like it's more about you, not us.
Yeah.
And that is frustrating.
Oh,
We
there was
saw
there was
through
so much
that.
there was so much inside baseball stuff
We
that I
saw
can't say on
through
air
that.
about Mike
I
Moran's
will-
relationship with the Bernie campaign and other Bernie delegates, which were not thrilled at his.
Yeah, like,
I
I was
would-
angry when he got voted in for at the state committee because I like
He really wanted me on that bus.
yeah.
Yeah,
oh.
there are comments that I will
No,
not
yeah,
make in
no,
this
no,
call,
no.
but
I'm not going into
relates
what people
to.
told me.
Alright, alright.
But like basically the vast majority of the legislature are underwhelming at best is how I would describe them.
Mediocre white man.
Yes. So and
Who are experts at nothing.
And so one of the things we usually try to do at the end of the show is plugs. Do we have plugs? Who should you vote for? Do you have any events coming up? Anything you want to promote?
In terms of
Anything.
In
What do you want
terms
people
of-
to look up that want to follow more
if you go to
stuff?
so in terms of like candidates, we do on the Progressive Mass website have our endorsements for different races in 2020. If you go to the website progressivemass.com, you can find that.
Yep.
For the most, I think like one of the only times we've actually like, I think there are only like 2 incumbents that we've endorsed to date, which are Rebecca Rausch in the Senate, who's great, was newly elected, somebody who's like definitely solidly to the left of her district, and that's important. Massachusetts, and Ed Markey. But in a number of cases, either people who are challenging.
We didn't even get into
No,
Ed
no,
Markey.
we don't have time.
Congratulations.
And then too long for that.
Oh my
this late in the
God.
game. And then a number of people, both primary incumbents, are important, or people we mentioned Erica before, people running in open races
Yeah.
who have important voices for the state house. So put in a plug for that of making sure that people do vote. That you should have gotten an application in the mail.
Oh, yeah.
For vote by
Sitting on the
mail. You
floor.
can send that in. You can early vote and later in August. You can vote in person on election day, but make sure to check as it gets closer if your polling location has moved. Because like the only way that the vast majority of mediocre white men in the Massachusetts legislature will ever not continue to be there or continue to be mediocre is if like the one way as I described this recently is as you as a constituent have to try to move them, and if you can't move them, just you need to remove them.
Yeah.
From their job. So whether that's you running or you helping somebody else run, it's like they don't if they're not earning their
Sam, any plugs?
Yeah, the only plug I got is, everybody knows me on the Twitter a little bit, but if you are interested in excellent hot takes and commentary, they can listen to We Need Some Milk podcast with my buddy Babu and myself. He lives in New Jersey, so he does the New Jersey shit, and I do the Massachusetts shit. And I'm mad about a lot of stuff because everybody is currently poor right now because of the pandemic, and no one seems to take that seriously. So I like to speak about that on the state and the local level with my best friend.
And I will echo
it's a
that
good
podcast.
show.
Yes,
It's a good
I enjoy
show.
listening to it.
Yeah.
Mine are quick, nothing personal. I'm going to just shout out Damali Vidot, Erica Idahoven, Anna Callahan, and of course Isan Leckie for the Massachusetts 4th District.
Fun thing with Damali is a case where you'd have a progressive woman of color replacing a Dan.
Oh, there we go.
No more Dan.
Yeah.
No more. Except Dan Cena. He's cool.
Yeah.
But his name's actually Danilo.
Yeah.
So he doesn't count.
Lauren, Herb.
So I want to plug. I'm gonna always plug Jordan Meehan because
Absolutely.
thank you, Jordan. No matter what happens, Honan keeps voting the way we want
Jordan.
because he's scared.
Yeah.
Gotta love Jordan. He comes to all the Alston Brighton Black Lives Matter things, which are all of 2 that we've managed to put on. I wish I had more big Black Lives Matter marches and events because I try to go to everything because there's nothing I love more than a protest. All I'm seeing is August 9, Mass Action Against Police Brutality, which is a great organization that I love to support, has a march Sunday at 3 starting at Terrence Coleman Park, which is called Peter's Dog Park on Washington Street, but it's Terrence Coleman's Park. I'll probably go to that. It's a great march. What else? What other marches are going on?
Massachusetts 1st District, Alex Morse.
Oh yeah, Massachusetts.
That's a big national fight.
Yeah.
That people should volunteer for. Thank you, Shane.
Okay.
Oh, and Nicole. I'm gonna.
Nicole Masalam.
Thank you.
Yes, Nicole Masalam's amazing.
Yeah.
Interviewed her on
Paul
the Young
Donato's
Turk.
one of the many mediocrities.
Yes. Nicole's amazing. Who else is running that I'm forgetting? Hassan, obviously. He's probably said that.
Like in terms of people who are primarying incumbents that are great.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 2 Morans. She's running against the other Moran, but Marinella Rivera is a Lawrence School Committee member and education justice activist up there.
Awesome.
Who's running and that definitely need more voices like that.
Awesome. And if anybody knows of any more protests for me to go to, I am getting bored and my calendar is sadly empty right now. I don't know what to do. Do I keep having to go troll Blue Lives Matter events? I guess so. I don't know. That's all. All right. What else are we playing?
This was fun.
Yeah,
this is fun. Thank
Sam,
you so
thank
much
you,
for calling
Jonathan,
in.
thank
And
you.
Jonathan,
Thank you for having me.
Herb just did 3 different podcast sessions.
I know, Herb's-
He's falling asleep.
Herb is falling asleep over there.
Jonathan could just talk for hours. It's like having.
I was gonna say, I could definitely keep you here if I wanted to. Just keep fucking you.
Yeah, those are my favorite guests though because I don't have to do any work.
Yeah, thank you.
This is the easiest show.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll do
much
it again
fun.
sometime. But
We will.
all right, bye,
All right.
Sam, Jonathan.
Bye,
Bye.
Sam.
Thank you.
Podcast
All right.
world.
Hey, wait. By the way, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, iTunes. We have a Patreon if you want to give me money. I don't have a job. I'd appreciate it. Also, we're on Facebook and everything else. iTunes, everything. Subscribe, leave reviews,
Bam.
whatever. Do all the social media stuff. We're out. Peace.
Later.